It's my pleasure to introduce President Mark Rosenberg of Florida International University, who, as many of you know, is a strong advocate for the university role in talent and workforce development. He's currently serving as chair of APLU's Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, and as the Secretary mentioned, he's also serving on the Secretary's Task Force on Apprenticeship. And with the Urban Serving Universities, President Rosenberg has established a new focus area on these issues. President Rosenberg will lead our first discussion about the changing landscape, changes in student demographics and needs, and changes in workforce skills and industry needs. President Rosenberg.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're here to follow on the conversation, and I'm really pleased that we have two very highly qualified panelists to be here with us. First is Kevin Carey, who directs education policy at New America. He writes on these issues. You've probably read some of his articles in the Chronicle of Higher Ed, in New Republic, and in Wired. And to his left is Amy Firestone, a senior advisor in the Department of Labor, in the U.S. Department of Labor, the Office of Apprenticeship. Now, we know that in higher ed these days we confront a number of critical issues, how to close the skills gap, how to keep our educations affordable, and perhaps more generally, what will be the structure of work that we're going to graduate our students into. And as the Secretary emphasized his vision about the relationship of doctrine to skills, basically what I see in this evolving world is a convergence, and it's a convergence between career and technical and baccalaureate education. Critical thinking skills will always be important, but increasingly we are asked to be far more effective and impactful as it relates to preparing our students for this brave new world of work that we're going into. So I'm going to ask our panelists some questions that will lead us in a very short period of time back to where the Secretary ended. But let me ask, first of all, to our panelists, what are the key changes that you see in work, and what is the impact on the American workforce?
I mean, I think one of the biggest changes is that the era in which workers can form long-term relationships with organizations is really kind of passing by. You know, the thought that you can start here at a large corporation and move your way up and gain skills along the way and be promoted, but always have that stable relationship with pension benefits and job security, that's not the world we live in anymore. And so, and people understand that, and I think that the insecurity of that probably is one of the various factors that's kind of feeding the anxiety a lot of us feel in American politics. And so I think that we need to give people need to be better equipped to navigate a world where they have less to depend on.
All right, thanks, Kevin. All right, Amy, what changes do you see in work, and what does it mean?
Definitely. Well, building off Secretary Acosta's remarks on apprenticeship and on four-year institutions, at the Department of Labor, we're really working with companies, small, medium, and large-sized companies, multinational companies, mom-and-pop shops, to understand their needs. They are facing the skills gap that Secretary Acosta talked about, that Mark Rosenberg discussed as well. But we also find the issue of massive amounts of student debt. Your institutions have students who are extremely qualified to do many different types of jobs. Myself, I have a PhD in Spanish linguistics from the University of Illinois. There were no jobs available for me or any of my colleagues. However, working with employers, we understand that there are many skills that students have, that your students have, that they cannot fill in many jobs in IT, cybersecurity, as a specialization, healthcare, advanced manufacturing. With the baby boomers retiring at massive rates, approaching 3 million people in the next 10 years, we are facing serious crises, and we are working with employers to figure out how we can fill those jobs, working with the talent that your institutions have.
So you're leading into it, but what changes do you think we need to make in higher ed, and particularly public universities, to be responsive here? And I want to note that the estimates vary, but maybe a third of our graduates are going into this gig economy world, to go back to Kevin's point. And they're shifting from job to job. So I'd just be curious, what do you think we need to do to be more impactful, more effective?
I mean, I think one thing colleges can do is do a better job of taking all of the information that is created about what students learn and, pardon me, creating credentials that actually have more meaning in the labor market. You know, we don't send students out with a lot of information about themselves. You look at the unemployment statistics, it's pretty clear that having a bachelor's degree in particular gets you to the head of some lines in the labor market, but they're not all very good lines. If you look at the earnings report, the earnings results that the Department of Education now publishes relative to people who leave colleges, there are an awful lot of people who are going through a four-year education, getting jobs, but not making very much money. There's a large variance there. And you also see this phenomenon where a lot of people finish bachelor's degrees and then have to go back to get another credential to get just a foothold in the labor market. I think a lot of the rise in some of these kind of open market boot camp type situations, you see a lot of new companies being created that are offering 6 and 9 month programs just to basically give people enough proof of skill that they can land their first job because the bachelor's degree isn't enough for that. Or people go back to get master's degrees, and we see this explosion in the one-year professional master's degree program. And we hear these debt statistics, but as we all know, the typical undergraduate with debt leaves with about $28,000 in debt. But I think a lot of those people probably will borrow more money in the next year to get a one-year master's degree than they borrowed for the entire 4 years that they went to undergrad, because their undergraduate education was subsidized, particularly if they went to a public university, whereas their master's degree isn't subsidized. There's a real inefficiency there. We know that a lot of students are actually learning a lot in their undergraduate careers, but for a variety of reasons, they're not able to prove that to employers in a specific and compelling enough way that they can get that first job. And so that's a solution that is more about kind of organization and potentially using some of our new technological tools to enhance the degrees that we give students so they can make that crucial first step into the labor market.
Okay, Amy? Thank you.
Definitely in agreement with everything that Kevin has just mentioned. We also see a lack of hands-on work-based learning opportunities for students, even starting in their freshman year of college. For example, many individuals who are in apprenticeship programs, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, they are in community colleges and in high schools, and they are earning while they're learning, just as Secretary Acosta mentioned. Therefore, they're able to apply those theoretical concepts they have learned in the classroom to actual needs on the job, vacancies that companies have for real positions in the real world. So this is something that we see especially with four-year degree institutions, that many of the classes are very strong in theoretical research, capstone courses, opportunities to really dig deep into the subjects they are studying, but that hands-on experience that is linked to a specific job and a specific industry is missing.
So that's a great segue into the question of apprenticeships. Kevin, what's your assessment about the notion that somehow apprenticeships could be key drivers, learning and earning initiatives, and the viability of universities being more deeply involved in that? And then I'll ask Amy the same question.
Yeah, I have a lot of enthusiasm for the apprenticeship idea. And the Center for Education and Skills at New America is heavily involved in a lot of the policy efforts and to sort of build around this idea. And I wrote a story in the New York Times about a month ago about a woman, a single mother, living in the Bronx, who had gone through a community health worker apprenticeship program. And so first of all, there's a long, long tradition of apprenticeship, as we heard, going all the way back to thousands of years ago, or 500 years ago in Raphael's case. But in the United States, both underutilized and very concentrated in pretty much blue-collar and very male professions. And those continue to be successful. But we know that a lot of the growth in the middle skills economy is not in those kind of jobs. It's in things like community health workers. This country needs a lot of community health workers in the future. These people are liaisons between the healthcare system and the rapidly aging population. It's a complicated job. It's a job that requires a lot of knowledge and skill. It's a job that you can pretty much only learn on the job, but you do need theory, and you do need information that you would learn in a practice setting. And so this was a program that was done in conjunction with the CUNY system. The woman took classes at night while she was working, but she also had a mentor who really kind of guided her through the whole process of how to be a community healthcare worker. And now she has a good job. She's a member of the SEIU. She has a credential in a growing field. It's worked out really well. So this idea of applying the apprenticeship concept to the labor market we live in now and the labor force we have now, and not just kind of keeping it narrow, is a really good one. I will say there are some interesting policy issues to be debated as we do this. And Secretary Acosta has been critical of the registered apprentice program because it only encompasses a very small number of workers, which is true. There is a danger, though, if we kind of open it up to industry to sort of define what apprenticeship means, that we could lose some of the essential components of it in terms of people earning a good wage, in terms of people really having a mentor, in terms of people getting an education. We saw in the UK, I think to some extent how this can go wrong, where they kind of opened up the apprenticeship program and Subway took out ads for sandwich apprentices. True story, sandwich apprentices. That's kind of swinging too far in the other direction, where anything can be an apprenticeship. So I do think we need to hold on to those essential elements so what we know works can be expanded to other fields.
Okay. Amy?
Definitely. Well, as you know, there's a lot of enthusiasm around the apprenticeship program. Secretary Acosta mentioned his remarks. All of the efforts that Department of Labor is doing right now to expand apprenticeship, and especially to be inclusive of 2- and 4-year institutions. So we are very grateful to have Mark Rosenberg as a member of our task force on apprenticeship, because we see this as a moment to really build new opportunities for students who may have never had that experience getting a job while they were in college that relates to what they're studying. For example, first-generation college students. Many of them don't have those critical networks to obtain real jobs with really, really great companies that relates to what they study. The apprenticeship program provides them with that very rigorous, structured training in which they are working for an employer, and what they are learning on the job matches exactly what they're studying through their degree program. So building off a few of the comments that have already been mentioned, we are working very hard to be inclusive of many different types of apprenticeship programs. The executive order on apprenticeship that the president signed in June has several sections that allude to building apprenticeship programs at 2- and 4-year institutions. We want the APLU to be a part of this movement and be our next partners in providing both students and companies with the talent they need and the opportunities they need to grow themselves professionally. I want to also mention that there are opportunities for students in all types of backgrounds, even though there is a large need and large gaps in certain areas in healthcare, manufacturing, and IT. There are students who are in the liberal arts and in the humanities who bring the skills that companies are looking for, the communication skills, many other skills, interpersonal skills that are essential to carrying out jobs as community health worker. How about CEO? Many of our apprentices started out as apprentices. They have now become CEOs of organizations, and your students are well equipped to become a part of this journey that the Department of Labor is working on, and we really appreciate your partnership.
So we have a few minutes for questions or comments disguised as questions. I think over there, yes, please.
So I'm from Colorado, and I've been standing at the interface between industry and the university, Colorado State University, for about 5 years now. And we're getting some pushback on apprenticeships from businesses because they say that the kids are not willing to make a 5-year investment or a 4-year investment. So we're looking at a broader basket of work-based learning opportunities, and I was hoping that we might look at work-based learning opportunities rather than just apprenticeships as maybe some solutions for some of these challenges.
Guess that's mine. Definitely, as a part of the executive order and all the great work that the task force on apprenticeship is doing right now as we speak, they are looking at new ways to provide work-based learning opportunities, including apprenticeships for all students, knowing that there are barriers, there are limitations, and working with companies to figure out what their needs are and building these opportunities for students. So I think there'll be a lot more to come as the task force develops new ideas and works on implementing them with important stakeholders like we have in Colorado.
And I did hear the secretary, I don't think I heard it quite framed this way today, but I have heard him say that apprenticeships broadly defined. So clearly, one size will not fit all, And many of you are already doing co-ops and great internships, and that the question is, can they be scaled in a way that begins to move the needle in terms of developing the 21st century workforce that we know we're going to need? I have a question here. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm Gail Spock from New Jersey Institute of Technology, and we have been working for a number of years now following the registered apprenticeship model using an intermediary, particularly in advanced manufacturing. But my question has to do with the millions of Americans who have earned a 2- or 4-year degree and may not be earning commensurate with their background. How do you see them fitting in to a more high level, which is needed in our country, apprenticeship program? So they're not coming back to school for another degree. What would you propose the 4-year schools do about this? Any ideas? Thank you.
I guess I can start, and then we have some other ideas. So one of the initiatives that we're working on now with the task force and with the executive order is building seamless career pathways starting from high school, leading to a 2- and 4-year degree through apprenticeship programs. So this is really much in the baby stages right now, but we figure that we need to reach students as apprentices when they are much younger, so that way they don't go into a degree program that doesn't really match their interest or their passion, that they have that on-the-job learning at a younger age. So we are working on a very exciting project right now with Project Lead the Way, a nonprofit that delivers STEM curriculum to 2.5 million high school students around the country. Working on them on building out pathways through engineering, starting in high school, forming very strategic partnerships with 2- and 4-year institutions in South Carolina as a first pilot. So these are ways in which we are helping build these pathways, working with both industry and education, providing students with an opportunity to gain that experience as an apprentice while they are paid, starting at a very young age. So this is a movement that we are expecting and hope that will be replicated around the country, not just in engineering, but in many other fields that your institutions offer.
Yeah, I think the kind of person that you're describing is really one of the most large and vulnerable student populations that we have. And we know for many of them what the answer has been to that question over the last 10 or 15 years. It's not go back and get a 4-year degree, because that seems like an impossible mountain to climb. It's not getting another associate's degree. It's going to a for-profit college. Because those are the institutions that offered what people felt like they needed, which was a relatively short path to a new career opportunity. Not something that would take years, maybe it was 6 or maybe it was 9 months. And of course, we've seen the horrible damage that has occurred from the exploitation in that sector, and that we're still contending with today. But to some extent, that opening was there because nobody else was filling it. Our 4-year public institutions and our 2-year institutions weren't focused on creating new, shorter degree pathways because they were kind of stuck in this very traditional degree framework and weren't all that interested in creating new kinds of programs. Now, again, if some of our community college colleagues were in the room, they would raise their hands and explain how they were doing a lot of those things, and many of them are. But nonetheless, a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, didn't take that path. And so this is, in some ways, my answer is a little bit of a variant on my answer to the first question from President Rosenberg, which is, can we put some real thought into increasing both the range and sophistication of our credentialing systems so we can then create educational programs that match them?
And there really, that's Kevin's point, is an invitation to begin to reframe who we work with. And that is, we're all student-centric, and we have to do better there, we know, particularly with graduation rates and retention rates. But increasingly, you may not be surrounded by students as much as you'd like, but you're probably going to be surrounded by people who need to learn. And so therefore, taking responsibility for that learning and finding new modalities to present it, to measure it, to certify it, I think is really what you're speaking to. I think we have time for one more? Okay, all the way in the back. Just quick question, please.
Sure. I'm Tiffany Mfume at Morgan State University, and we are beginning a sophomore experience plan for this cohort of freshmen to have all of them have an internship experience by the beginning of their third year, which is significantly earlier than most colleges or universities build it into the curriculum. Our challenge is that not only do our students, we're public urban research university, have to make wages in these internships to offset or to replace the jobs that they have on the side, but also the scheduling of these internships. Companies have traditional work hours. We have students who are involved in sports, athletics, band, choir, and just the logistics of scheduling around students' other commitments with their families, with their course schedule, with their different things that they're working with on campus. So the combination of the scheduling and really having some salary or hourly rate that would meet their needs is a challenge, even though we know the experience would pay off later.
Do you want to do a quick stab at that, either of you?
Sure. So I know it's definitely an area of concern that students are overcommitted, that professors are overcommitted, and providing these opportunities can be very challenging. But I think, just as Secretary Acosta mentioned, there are new ways to embed apprenticeship programs or other work-based learning programs into the curriculum. Putting on a previous hat of mine, I used to teach Spanish in the community, a Spanish community service learning course for undergrads. And in that class, the students did community service work with nonprofits in the community all week long. They weren't paid, and unfortunately, it was their last priority. However, imagine if they were paid. Imagine if it were a more robust work-based learning experience. So there are ways in which universities can really strategize to utilize the programs they already have and embed a more paid component to them so they're not overcommitted with many other things that don't necessarily relate to their degree completion.
Yeah, clearly there need to be many different modes of allowing students to learn while they work. And apprenticeships are kind of long and lead directly into jobs. And there may be students who are getting a four-year degree at someplace like Morgan State, where actually what they need are a couple different opportunities to engage in a more short-term basis. I have significant concerns about the kind of laxness of the way that many internships are defined. I'm sure not at your university, but I certainly. At their worst, internships can be kind of pretty exploitative in both directions, and so you have students who are essentially paying tuition in order to work for free, borrowing money. I mean, they're earning like a large negative wage, essentially, for internships that vary widely in quality. You can point to plenty of examples where internships are well-structured, well-supervised by institutions, and you can point to plenty of examples where it's basically a free-for-all, and the institutions are just kind of collecting the tuition, giving the credit out, but not really seriously making sure that these are structured opportunities. Frankly, I think a lot of internship programs are like directly in violation of federal labor law. It's just like, come work for us for free, please, or thank you. And so this is a case where I think institutions need to kind of come together and maybe do a better job of setting standards for what internships ought to be, and therefore ought not to be. I think that could go a long way towards improving that as an experience for students.
And finally, just to put a close on that as we close this panel, is that, as I look at the audience, I think that probably most of us, if we worked when we attended our respective institutions of higher education, we organized our work around our studies. But in this 21st century, we're going to have to meet students where they are, not where we want them to be. And most of those students are organizing, if they're working, they're organizing their studies around their work, which means I think we're going to have to get a lot more flexible to meet the needs and to help close those gaps. Would you please join me in thanking our panelists for their quick response?